How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back, offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world. And we'd like to tell you about them. NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
Hey there. This is Jeff Fritz, the purple blazer guy from Microsoft, letting you in on a little secret about my friend Carl Franklin. You know, the guy who started .NET Rocks, the first podcast about .NET. In 2002, the guy who's been teaching Blazor on YouTube since 2020. Yeah, that Carl Franklin. Well, Carl's joined up with the folks from Code in a Castle to teach a week-long hands-on Blazor class at, are you ready? Get this, at a castle/villa in Tuscany. It's sort of a luxury vacation with Blazor learning built in. Carl's calling it the Blazor Master Class. You'll learn Blazor from the ground up, finishing the week with the ability to build and deploy Blazor applications. Since the training happens for only 4 hours in the morning over 6 days, you can bring your significant other, your partner with you, and you should, right? This part of Italy is absolutely beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and Larry and Marco from Code in a Castle are organizing daily activities both at the castle and in the area. The castle is in the Maremma, a less touristed region of Tuscany, offering both classic Tuscan hill country as well as easy access to the Etruscan Riviera with sublime local food, wine, and olive oil around every corner. Breakfast is included every day. There will be 2 communal dinners at the castle bookending the experience, and most other meals and all activities are included. And did I mention you'll learn Blazor in person from Carl Franklin? Listen, space is limited and for very good reason. This is quality training in a beautiful setting. Go to codeinacastle.com/Blazor2023. That's BLAZOR 2023 to take advantage of this amazing opportunity to join Carl in Tuscany for an unforgettable week of La Dolce Vita while advancing your programming skills in this important new technology.
Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. Welcome back. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And our old friend Ted Neward is here. We're going to introduce him in a few minutes. But first, dude,
what's up?
All sorts of things happening in your neck of the woods, particularly your neighborhood. What happened?
Well, yeah. We were getting to a weird place with where do you want to live? What do you want to do? You know what I realized in hindsight is that the old dog passed away about a year ago.
Right.
And so it's just been the two of us in the house. We went from dog, cat, and 2 daughters in February of 2020 to just us by March of 2022.
And then there was 2 daughters and a boyfriend, right?
Well, they weren't here for very long. They went off into their own places. Now husband, right? They're all done. But it's like the 2 of us in this house. This is a house built to raise a family in.
Yeah.
And as much as we love it and we built it like it fits us in a lot of ways, it's a lot of house. And as soon as we started talking in terms of not having this house, immediately we're talking about building another one. So
you didn't think about, taking one of the rooms and making it all stainless steel and putting a villain chair in it and, having multiple monitors?
Well, to be clear, we had a room for restoring looms. Like that's the place we were at. There was a loom room, which by the way had its own ensuite in case you needed to go to the bathroom. So we have too much space. It's
that
too
house
much.
is amazing.
It is a great house. And the buyers are a young family with 2 teenagers. Like it's a perfect replacement.
Yeah.
We're moving to the coast full time. I suspect we'll build something eventually, but we're ready to simplify a little. And
well, congratulations.
I'm okay with it. I'm really happy. And then my neighbors are quite annoyed with us, but that's okay. Because it's a tight-knit neighborhood, as you know. You've been here.
I remember the parties and stuff, and I actually attended one where all the neighbors came over, and that's a really cool thing, because not everybody has neighbors that just get together for, special events like sunsets.
Yep. And all through the pandemic, when we'd come out on our driveways at 6:00 with a glass of wine.
Yeah. That's nice.
Toast each other and go back in. I love this place. And
now you can do that with the otters.
Yeah. I would also say there's a couple of my neighbors literally in the cul-de-sac that have places on the coast as well. Oh. So they're entirely possible to be retiring up there themselves sometime in the future. Not that I'm retiring, or arguably I am retired. This is me goofing off.
What is this word you speak of, retire? I don't even
know what to tell you anymore. Right?
I don't know what you're talking. That's nonsense.
Anyway, but you would think by getting rid of a house, my project list would get shorter.
Yeah.
You would be incorrect, sir. So it's like this.
Yeah, now you got to clean it all up. And,
there's just not enough automation up on the coast. There's some automation on the coast, but there could be much more automation on the coast.
All right. Well, enough of this fascinating chit chat. Let's get to, Ted's laughing. Let's get to Better Know a Framework. Boom.
Awesome. All right, man. What do you got?
Oh, as if I didn't have enough to do, I started a new frickin' YouTube show.
Are you out of control or what?
I'm out of my mind. I don't know. Everybody's like, "Hey, is your marriage okay? Are you you're like spending more time making shows than you are with your wife?" And she might tell you that's true, but I don't think so. But anyway,
I mean, the thing is, you're recording from your house these days.
Yeah,
so it's not like you're gone. You're just you're just in a little box full of foam.
That's right, and and a microphone.
That's it.
Some foam and a microphone, a little webcam. But so the thing is that I got this stuff down to a science. It's all automated as much as I know what I'm doing.
Sure. Pretty
now,
sure.
When a good topic comes along, such as AI bots, and I have friends that have been into it since the very beginning, and they've done some amazing things, a show happens. So it's It's the AI Bot Show with me and Brian McKay. And Brian McKay is one of our AppVNext guys. He's extremely smart and extremely resourceful. So anyway, it's at the AIBotShow.com. There should be at least 3 episodes up there, an introduction to ChatGPT. And then in the second one, we talked about prompt engineering, and we used the GPT API playground to write a little 3-act play, basically, or a 3-act screenplay. Everything from it helping us find the topic and the characters and the conflicts. And, we basically started with a 1-paragraph story premise. And then, got through different acts and the beats and the scenes. And
that's classic writer brainstorming technique.
Exactly.
Here you're storming with a piece of software.
Right. And he basically has this idea where you take the key ideas that you get, you say, give me 5 ideas. You take the one you want, you add it to the system prompt, which is sort of the backstory. And then it continues generating from there. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff.
AIBotShow.com. Know it, learn it, love it. Who's talking to us today? Richard Campbell?
You're going to love this.
Okay.
I grabbed a comment of a show 1085.
What?
So that's January of 2015. And it's disturbing to me to say 2015 and say 8 years ago. But this is a show we did with David Simons when I just called it Different Databases.
Right.
Because it's really, early in a lot of those conversations too about whether SQL, NoSQL, like who cares, and generated a ton of comments at the time. In fact, I've read many of them, but this one I haven't read. And this is from Thomas Jansen. And Thomas Jansen says, This is close to a talk I did at NDC London, which makes me think we should probably have Thomas on the show one of these days. Called Polyglot Heaven.
Okay.
And considering we have Ted around today, like there's a line he's used before too. Specifically in the talk, he dug into using multiple data stores in a given application based on what's appropriate. What's the shape of the data? What's the sensitivity and so forth. And in his particular demo for his talk, he was using Elasticsearch and Neo4j. He goes on to say, one of the things that Richard mentioned was to store objects as they were received, but a better approach is to store the events as a result of the action the user was taking. I think this is a little bit of semantics, but it's good semantics. By storing the event, you get a complete audit log of what has happened, but not necessarily the state of the object. And this is a good thing. The reason is that it's a good thing is because the state could have many things in a system depending on how you choose to read the events. But the fact that something has happened can't change. Also, these events you store can trigger other parts of the system executing long-running processes or processes that just update different read views that could be stored in SQL, Neo4j, Mongo, Elasticsearch, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And another thing that Carl was worried about this particular episode was eventual consistency. And to be clear, every time something makes an action, it is almost always doing it on data that could be old. The important part is if you're using an event store and event sourcing, is that when you're executing the action will be directed against the event store database, which is consistent. The inconsistent part is that the user or some other system might have triggered an action on old data, but that is something that is really hard to work yourself around. Really love the show.
But also kind of a rare occurrence if you do it right.
Yeah. And it does make sense to optimize for the majority of cases and then deal with exceptions as exceptions occur, right? You think about every single website you ever go to look at airfares. Yeah. They're all lies. Oh, yeah. It's just that only because most people never actually buy the airfare. So what do you care that it's a lie? And then when you actually go to buy it, once in a while, it's going to go, hey, remember that airfare we showed you? Yeah, we lied. Sorry. Yeah. Here's the new airfare.
Somebody was faster than you.
Yeah. It's just a cache failure. That's all it is. But it's best compensated with a happy dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about this one instead?
Yeah. the one that costs more. Oddly enough. Hey, Thomas, thanks so much for your comment. And a copy of Music Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter if you want, but the cool kids are on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social. And is it really the cool club? Because I think Threads is the cool club now.
Threads sucks. I'm sorry. It's maybe it has the potential once it uses federation and all that stuff, which it doesn't yet. But the app itself I hate it.
But let me say this. 100 million people disagree with you.
Yeah. That's because they're sheepies.
It's a very big number. That is like a quarter or maybe even a third of all of Twitter in a week.
Yeah, that's true.
Network effect is important, friend.
Well, it's because everybody on Instagram said, okay, I'll try that.
Yeah, and this is the brilliant. Listen, Zuckerberg screwed a lot of stuff up for quite a while. This is a pretty slick move.
Yeah, so now he just has to fix the app so that it actually has functionality.
Well, he's got the network effect. Maybe he can he's already spent billions on an app that doesn't work. Maybe he can spend some money on an app that does work.
That's right. Hey, Zuck, call me. I'll fix it for you.
It'll be fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, everything's fine. We're all fine here. How are you?
Let's get to work.
Yeah. All right, let's introduce Ted. Ted Neward, how long has it been since you were on this show?
It's a long time. I would say 2015. That would be my guess.
2015. All right.
I'm wrong.
I think it's going to be even longer than that.
It's 2014. He was on the panel that we did at the End Service Bus Conference. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Boondoggle in Brooklyn. Boy, that was a riot.
That was fun.
He was on that panel. The last full show he did on his own, 2012, 10 years ago.
Oh, my God. So your bio has changed. It's a lot more general, but you've done so much work. I'm just going to read what's on your site here. Ted Neward is an industry professional with 20 plus years. I put in the plus there. Experience. He speaks at conferences all over the world and writes regularly for a variety of publications across the Java, .NET, and other ecosystems. He currently resides in Pacific Northwest with his wife, 2 sons, 3 cats, 12 laptops, 7 tablets, 9 phones, and a rather large utility bill.
I like that one.
That's a great one.
And actually, since we were speaking of domestic situations, I need to revise that because one son has moved out.
Oh,
There you go.
right.
Yeah. So it's just 1 son, 3 cats, and all the rest of the paraphernalia.
Well, I remember meeting you somewhere. You were a teacher, a trainer, developmentor, and a consultant there. And when .NET first started, you were intrigued because you were a Java guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then C# turns out was pretty damn good.
Well, so the interesting story there is, I was at Developmentor teaching Java when, Microsoft, all the .NET stuff was still very, very hush-hush. Nobody knew anything about it.
But Don knew about it, and so did
Don knew about it. Don Box. And
Don Box and Chris Sells probably.
I think only Don to start because they kept the circle of trust very, very tight back in those days.
And Don was part of the Soap Spec guys. He and Dave Weiner, they contributed to the Soap Spec, so they were naturally pulled into the process.
Yeah. And so we were down in LA for a instructor retreat, and Don pulled a bunch of us, basically put a piece of paper in front of us and said, sign this or you need to leave the room. And it was an extension of the NDA to allow Don to tell us about this forthcoming .NET thing, which back then was still, they hadn't quite figured out the names. So it was like next gen
web services.
Yeah.
Well, the first version was Windows services, but then consent decree web services.
Yeah. Oh, they went through, that was actually one of the t-shirts that we had at one point was all of the different names, COM3, COM Plus, all of them X'd out, NGWS, URT, Universal Runtime X'd out.
Yeah.
And so,
but it's part of the reality that .NET was not an intentional product. Like the universal runtime was addressing a Windows problem and had nothing to do with needing an alternative to Java and had nothing to do with, wow, our web tech sucks. Right? Like the fact that they all came together is kind of miraculous, although there's very much a Conway's Law effect of that's why there were too many teams involved. And a lot of the architectural decisions are a bit odd because it had to do with the team with the idea had to be the team implemented it, even if it was in the wrong place.
Yeah. So anyway, that was your introduction to .NET. And we interviewed you early on in .NET Rocks.
Oh yeah.
Mark Dunn and I.
Yeah.
And,
I think I've actually done a .NET Rocks with all of your co-hosts. I did one with Mark. I did one with Rory. And
Richard.
I've done several with Richard.
That's a pretty special.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised you've done several with me.
Well, I just like you, Richard.
I don't know if that's true either, but
There are very few people, very, very few people in the world that I invited to my 40th birthday party, and only one that I asked to MC the roast.
yeah, there's that. Yeah. That's mostly because I think that's almost kind of a punishment, actually. Although I get to spend time with your sister, and your sister is awesome. So.
Well,
but here's the thing that I know about you, Ted, and that we can, your bio doesn't really explain it. You are like the polyglot. You've
always been a polyglot.
All of these languages on top of the JVM. You know a lot of languages on top of .NET. Some that aren't even in .NET. A lot of different languages, a lot of different technologies. You were you were the anti-ORM guy back when you and Oren Eni had that slap smackdown show.
Well, that was your idea.
Canada.
Well,
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But you were the guy who's like store procedures. And Oren's like, no. And then, that debate raged on for a while. And now you're back here to talk about Couchbase.
Well, so part of the thing is I've always looked at technologies and particularly new stuff that's coming down the pipe. But more importantly, I think it's the way to describe me. The polite way is to say philosopher. The more accurate way is to say contrarian. So back during, the 2000s, particularly in the Java space, everybody was going hog wild over enterprise Java beans and object relational mapping tools. And I was trying to point out that there are significant costs to using these things and to say, don't just take it by default. And so, yeah, that's when I penned the, object relational mapping is the Vietnam of computer science, for which that is still the thing I am most widely known. That actually earned me an entry in Wikipedia.
Okay.
So,
But that was a point in time, like you're pointing out, right? Things change and things evolve, and some things that weren't working as so well back then got fixed, and new technologies came out around it.
Well, part of the thing is we have to be a little bit careful because, yes, we made changes, but there are also certain properties of the universe that are immutable, such as the speed of light, right? The fallacies of distributed computing are always going to be there because as soon as you try to go from one machine to another, it gets very, very expensive in time and energy and bandwidth and so forth.
Compared to within the machine. I mean.
Exactly.
We're only slicing seconds here, but you're going from nanoseconds to milliseconds in a lot of cases.
And as soon as you change orders of magnitude like that, and the big concern was that a lot of the ORMs at the time, lazy loading was the word of the day. And so it'd be like, oh, well, let's go fetch one property at a time. So you're making all these trips back and forth between these two nodes in the network, and suddenly wondering why your system is slow. This holds, by the way, whether we're talking about, databases, whether we're talking about web services, whether we're talking about, grid computing, if you remember that phrase from way back when, cloud, it as
JSON
long as they are
over
two
HTTP, just regular stuff.
Bingo, right? These things still hold. And so, part of what I've always tried to do is to look at things and say, all right, yes, there is a mainstream view of things, but how do we, let's get out of the mainstream for a second, because it turns out the 80-20 rule still holds. 80% of what anybody does can probably fit in the mainstream. But then there's the 20% around the outside edges that don't fit. And so this is where, particularly as I started looking into databases, of course, I was looking at all the NoSQL at the time.
Right.
And there are tremendously useful things about a NoSQL database. You look at MongoDB for a second, the document shape of things.
Before we get into that, I want to go back a point where you were talking about how certain, constants like the speed of light and being chatty and all that. And I think that IAsync enumerable changed a lot of things, don't you? When we could do streaming either locally or over the internet, that did. I mean, it's sort of a nice answer to lazy loading when you're talking about data. That it changes things. I'm not necessarily going to go so far as to say it solved all problems. No.
But it certainly, it changes where things occur and how things occur, right? Yeah. A lot of this is born out of the whole reactive programming space. And reactive, in many responses says we're still going to pay the cost of time in terms of data moving over the network. Right. But we're going to pay it differently.
Your users aren't going to notice it. Let's put it in a perfect world.
Ideally, right? Yeah. But I mean, if an interesting experiment that I often do, because one of the things I've done since we last talked is I actually am a guest lecturer at the University of Washington. So I'm actually talking to undergrads on a regular basis. And spring quarter, I was teaching distributed systems. And so one of the things I was pointing out is, yes, there's the cost of sending all this stuff across the network. But let's do an interesting experiment. Bring up the Amazon.com homepage, but don't look at the actual center of the browser. Look at the bottom. Look at the status bar, right? Because it flickers as it loads various images and so forth. And let's count how long it takes to actually fully load the Amazon.com homepage. And it's measured in seconds, and it's not single digit seconds. But what they do is they load the first, first page, if you will. Right. They load the first that you can see very quickly. Yes. And then they go fill in all this other stuff asynchronously.
Right. By the time you scroll down,
bingo,
you'll see it, and you would think that it's been there all along, when in fact it just got there.
Right. Right. And in many respects, it's a brilliant use of asynchronous, loading to say most people aren't ever going to go below the fold anyway. So let's load all that stuff after the fact, but let's make sure that above the fold, the first, 800,000 something pixels, that loads immediately, right? That loads as fast as we can possibly get it. And there are so many ways that you can approach the design of a system, the design of a page, of your user interaction, whatever you want to call it, to reflect that, right? Yeah. That is clearly somebody who sat down and looked very, very much not just at the numbers in the system, but the way people were interacting with the system.
All right. Good talk. Next. No, you started talking about MongoDB and all that stuff, and I interrupted you. I apologize.
Well, the big thing was, when NoSQL came around, right? Originally, the goal was to release us from some of the things we were doing with respect to transactions and to be able to get to some of that eventual consistency that you were talking about earlier. But along the way, when somebody said, okay, we're going to break away from the relational database, here's an opportunity. Let's really break away from the relational database. And so they started changing up the data, the data shapes, the data models, right? So now instead of it always being relations and rel vars, let's look at documents. Let's look at graph. And what I'm seeing now personally, looking at some of these different databases, and this is kind of where I got into conversations with Couchbase and I'm working with them to kind of, introduce them into more of the university setting as part of my stuff at UW. Different databases are now actually allowing us to do a certain amount of combination of various things. Before it was you got relations and rel vars, you had transactional, and you didn't even see the storage engine. That was just, a baked in opaque property of the database. Today, we are seeing databases being able to plug some of the storage engine, so like, MySQL will let you choose which storage engine you use. We can decide whether we want to run it cloud or on-prem. We can make all of these interesting decisions either between products or within products, but more and more of them are starting to go the whole multi-model route, right? Which is one of the reasons why Couch is interesting, because early NoSQL said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a document model, but you're going to have to write a lot of code to query it, right? You got to do this query by example stuff. And, Couch was one of the Couchbase. I have to be careful because there's Couchbase and there's CouchDB, and they are very, very different things. Okay. The Couchbase guys said, no, we can give you your SQL or a SQL-like dialect. We can give that to you.
Nickel. And
yeah, exactly.
And
you can go get it. Go query to your heart's content. And, that in many ways addresses some of the concerns people have. Couchbase supports, some of the traditional relational view of things, as well as, they've got, some degree of graph. I don't know that I would go so far as to call it a full graph database.
There's also a link to Couchbase tool out there. So you could use your good old familiar link syntax, which is very SQL-like and very functional. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, to me, this is interesting simply because it means that it opens up a whole lot more in the way of opportunities to choose things. 25 years ago, if we were talking, the only choice you had with respect to where you were going to store your data is which relational database were you going to use, right? Was it SQL Server? Was it Oracle? Or maybe if you were really heretical, you chose one of the open source ones, right? MySQL or Postgres.
Right.
Today,
you didn't even say DB2. I didn't know what's wrong with you.
DBase.
Oh, well, IBM just decided that they were going to charge for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, so now they are dead to me. That's what's going on there. The options available, and frankly, that's very intimidating to a lot of people, right? There are a significant number of developers and architects out there who find that choice intimidating because it's like, what if I choose the wrong one?
Yeah. Because we all know how changing the database sucks. That's a brutal prospect. I don't know how often they get to even choose. We're paying for SQL Server licenses. You will store your data in SQL Server.
There is that too. Yeah. Yeah, there is that. Although the joys of microservices, right? Now persistence is all, an internal detail, right? It's encapsulated away because it's all part of my microservice. So,
Yeah.
Well, that's for those that are doing microservices. There's a lot of us out there that aren't.
Well, and I would also argue it's one of the reasons that the open source database took off, because the license hammer is defeated by, but it's free.
Right.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the case of Couchbase, I like some of the decisions they've made. I like some of the people that I've talked to. There are a lot of other, viable tools to use. And as a matter of fact, one of the things, spring quarter, I was also teaching a data and databases course to the kids at UW, and teaching them relational databases. I use SQLite because
It's free?
It's free, and frankly, it's localized.
Right.
And so suddenly it opens up a whole lot of opportunities to avoid making those round trips. And I saw a great little meme that said, every time somebody says this meeting could have been an email, there is somebody else saying this database could have been a SQLite.
Yeah. Right.
I love it.
Well, if your database has one user.
And where so many databases have exactly one user? You're holding it in your hand, boys and girls.
Right. The phone.
The phone. Yep.
Well, you're holding it in your hand.
Well, I was holding it, yes. But,
I'll pick mine up too, just to be
There you go.
one of the cool kids.
I'm just running down the sort of the features of Couchbase. Obviously, it's document oriented, distributed. So there's a distributed architecture, so it can scale horizontally, right? And depending on where you're running it and on what hardware, or if it's a cloud thing, all the cloud providers have services for it. In-memory optimization, right? So if you could think of it like, load a JSON file into a dictionary. There's your database, right? And then there's this NYQL, NYQL query language, which is kind of like SQL, but designed for JSON data. Synchronization, Couchbase Mobile. So a mobile database, like you were talking about, SQL, SQLite, but this is Couchbase Lite, and a synchronization gateway so that you can do that. And then, of course, it's got integrations and SDKs and all sorts of stuff. And I also mentioned before this link to Couchbase, which is good for .NET developers if you're used to link, right? So it's pretty cool.
The other thing I know that the Couchbase folks are talking a great deal about and, offering is Capella, which is their cloud hosted flavor of. I mean, you can certainly get Couchbase to run in your favorite AWS, Azure, whatever. But, what is the practical difference between you figuring out which version to install and just letting Couchbase deal with it in their cloud, right?
Well, and just that option too, just go,
Right.
hey, I don't have to decide now. We're just running this in the local rig while we're figuring stuff out. But when it comes to scaling, it's like, do I really want to build this infrastructure? Or can I just shift to the services model? And it's done.
Database as a service. Pretty awesome.
Gotta love it.
And gentlemen, and I'm going to use that term very loosely today, I need to interrupt for one moment for this very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
And our old friend Ted Neward, who only...
Hey, careful with that old. Careful with that old.
Emphasis on the word old.
That first show was 59, which I think is actually Rory at that point.
Yeah.
But, you're pretty
really?
close.
Yeah, I
right in
think
that
so.
ballpark. And we're talking a little bit about the modern data landscape, I think, more than anything. Just that, different ways to store. I really like this multi-model mindset. Just that what engine would you like to use? What form would you like to store? I mean, even SQL servers headed down this path these days.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like now that you say it, it's like, wow, that's really what's happening with data storage these days. It's like, well, what do you got? Let me hold it for you. Let me index for you.
And this is where, some knowledge of database internals will help, right? Because one of the things that we saw, in terms of, let me back up for a second, because earlier you talked about the comment from Thomas, and I can't remember his last name, sorry.
Jensen.
And he was talking about polyglot persistence and storing data in different databases. One of the drawbacks to that approach is the fact that in many cases, trying to do so atomically across these different databases was tricky. And so if I were storing something in my document that also needed to modify something in the graph, okay, in one case, I'm doing it to a CouchDB. In the other case, I'm doing it to a Neo4j. And making sure that both of those got updated or neither did was always a little problematic because you're going across databases. And we didn't in the early days really have distributed transactions across different NoSQL databases. When the database vendors started to embrace this multi-model thing, now it became possible to do that atomically because it's all inside of one transaction manager, the one database, and still have some of your multi-model. But you have to be a little bit careful because how do they store things internally is going to really affect some of the performance, right?
Right. Like, for example, there's no date or time types in Couchbase.
Right. Right.
Oops.
I just think you quietly walk past the real estate, which was life is too short for distributed transactions.
Well, there is that. There is
Friends
that.
don't let friends.
Once upon a time, I crushed my soul trying to make DTS work. Truly tried to make it work.
Oh, we all did. We all did. Because truthfully, that was what we all of us believed and taught everybody else. And what was the canonical example for transactions? Banking, right? Yeah, I'm going to make a deposit to you. So we're going to take out a lock and we're going to make sure that we remove the money from my account and deposit it to your account. And the great lie behind all of that was that's not actually how banking works.
It never has.
It's never been a thing. Exactly.
Oh, and by the way, if you're using JavaScript for those floating point data types, you got another problem.
Well, okay.
There's going to be some funny looking pennies showing up real time now.
There are those problems that we inherit. There are those problems we make for ourselves. And let's, if you're using floating point in any language, for money, we have a problem. Yeah, seriously, experience tip.
Money is not floating point.
No, it's not.
Tip for you all kids, right? Don't count dollars with fractions of a dollar. Count pennies. Yeah. It's all pennies, right? $1 is 100 money units. Going past the whole transactions thing, distributed transactions thing, right? Especially because when we needed to scale, contention is the enemy of scale, right? Just repeat that to yourself over and over and over again. And, the multi-model databases allow us to, work with all these different shapes of data. But deep down, obviously they have to store data somehow. And this is why a lot of the early multi-models were built on top of key value stores, right? Here's a primary key and the rest of it is a blob, binary array. And you can interpret that however you want. But every time you fetched that, it had to be repounded into shape before it gave it back to you. Now, some of the databases seem to be experimenting with more in the way of, like actually storing it differently with indexes in weird places. So it's not just one storage engine. They're actually using multiple storage engines depending upon what you're storing underneath there.
And then, and a unified indexing strategy.
Right.
So is this really just a performance thing? Just, hey, let's take the shape of the data and store it in the closest thing to its natural shape?
I think that that's where you get the best performance, generally speaking, right?
Because the customer doesn't care. They just expect us to store the data and be able to retrieve it.
Right.
And sooner would be better.
And cheapest possible, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Cheap is also handy.
Yeah. Well, and I think, all of this is still relative, right? Because so much of this, so much of the performance of your query could be drowned out by the length of time it takes that web request to arrive at the page and then get back to the browser. Yeah. So again, go back to what we talked about earlier, the Amazon story, right? In many cases, let me just fetch an initial set of data, get it back to you, and then we can go get more later if you need it. Right?
Yeah.
And do so asynchronously in that sort of reactive model that Carl talked about. But part of what any system designer, part of what any architect needs to do is figure out where we need to be really responsive and where we can do that asynchronous loading. And in many cases with databases, we can do some of that by saying, let me query what I'm looking for, but then let me also pull back some additional data, but pull that back asynchronously or what have you. And this applies not just to databases, obviously, web services and JSON services and blah, 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 blah. You know.
Do we still love JSON in 2023?
It's just a data format. I mean, I never fell out of love with XML. I never fell out of love with CSV.
I fell out of love hard with XML.
Me
and XML,
Carl,
we have issues, man.
You're just a love them and leave them kind of data format guy.
Yep.
You know?
But JSON, I never had a problem ever. No, okay. No, I have had problems with JSON. I have had problems where by default, a serializer or deserializer changes the case of properties to camel case when that's not the case. That's not what they are. And therefore it fails. Yeah, I have a problem with that.
Well, see, here's the fun thing, right? Because XML could actually account for that for you. Because XML has something that JSON doesn't, which is the opportunity to capture metadata directly in the format, right? And I find it absolutely telling that you know what people are working on right now? Schema for JSON.
Oh, God. No, wait.
This is the, well,
No, stop.
how many times have we seen this? This is the path to hell.
I got a headache.
You know what would be even more fun? How about schema for XML? Can we do that? That would be really fun. Let's do that.
Hey, man, schema for XML, it was incredibly.
I'm not saying schema for XML didn't buy me a car, because it did. Right. But it doesn't mean it was ever a good idea.
Right. It's self-defining.
But here's the thing, right? Is first of all, the idea of schema itself is not bad because it allows machines to be able to do a bunch of the work that we would normally have to do.
And verifying, yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, validation.
And where the XML committee, I think, got XML schema wrong is they tried to write XML schema in XML. To be fair, it's because they wanted to do everything in XML all the time. We just kind of started, believing our own stuff.
Now I need a schema for my schema.
Well, and you know who else did that is the SQL committee, right? Because they want schema defined within the SQL language itself. So they just created a whole bunch of new keywords and so forth to do it. So this notion of trying to get kind of this linguistic closure that we can define the language inside the language, it's.
I see what you did there with that language reference there. I saw that. I got you. I'm on to you, man.
It's an interesting idea, and I don't know, I know a lot of language designers find it to be really interesting and elegant. I don't know how much that elegance actually pays off in the long run.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they still go after it. And, JSON LD, I think it is the schema for JSON. I think they're trying to do it in JSON at the same time. And it's like, maybe it's not bad to just have a different definition, but please don't throw YAML at this particular problem because that's just this.
Oh God, I was waiting for you to bring up that awesome language.
YAML loves you. YAML loves you.
I cannot stand YAML.
YAML loves you.
But these are all just representations of data, right?
Yeah.
And, I really want us to stop, reinventing new data formats that do the same thing and then arguing about it. That's what I'd really love us to do.
Can't we all just get along?
We could have cured cancer by now if we had taken all this energy around data formats and just put it towards, identifying the human genome. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay.
Now.
I love it.
Yeah. So do this Couchbase Cloud database as a service, I think, is available.
Capella.
Yeah. I think it's available on all the cloud platforms as well as the, Couchbase cloud thing, isn't it?
I don't know officially. I do not work for Couchbase. They do not, give me benefits or anything like that. So I'm not a salesperson. I don't know the full details. And I don't have their website up in front of me. I would believe it if you told me though, because I know they've been pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a story on Couchbase.com from January 2021. Couchbase Cloud now available on Microsoft Azure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think part of the idea of Capella is you are treating Couchbase as your cloud, but you can probably specify which cloud provider you're in. But don't quote me on that. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, it looks that way. So run Couchbase multi-cloud across AWS, Azure, and GCP. So you could do that. There you go.
And I think they're already by what you've said and what I remember conversing with Matthew Groves, who is one of Couchbase's more public figures. I believe part of what they're trying to do there is automatically incorporate some of the multi-cloud strategy that people often talk about for greater reliability.
Right.
So
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I always question that one because the cloud's out relying all of our data centers. Like, come on. It's a pretty big overhead to take on, but to me, having the checkbox item there at least is a good idea. Whether or not you actually want to pay for the implementation is another question entirely.
Well, it kind of goes back to two things, right? Number one, the reliability argument, which given how reliable all three of the big cloud players are already, I'm not sure if it's worth it. But the other is vendor neutrality, right? So that if AWS decides to pull an Oracle and bump their prices up by, 10,000%, you can say, yeah, okay, we'll just flip over here to Azure, flip the switch, and we're there.
Yeah.
But again, like you said, you pay a price for that, right? And vendor neutrality is frequently what got the Java folks in trouble when we tried to be vendor neutral.
Right.
I mean, that was part of the whole OR9E discussion way back when, was stored procedures were intrinsically tied to a particular database vendor. So you automatically weren't vendor neutral. So therefore, stay away, said the Java community.
But also, I mean, he wanted to have SQL in his app. He wanted to generate that SQL dynamically, in the ORM, because that's how they work.
Yeah.
And, if he has to go through stored procedures, that adds a level of complexity and blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
And it violates encapsulation, right? Just to go back and put my little whipped cream and a cherry on that, because I still remember
confused.
back in 1997
here from another planet.
I was good till the whipped cream showed up. Everything was fine.
Oh, come on.
It was all fine till the whipped cream showed up.
You're not so naive as that, Richard Campbell. If you've ever been sitting in your cubicle and had somebody call you up and start yelling at you because you broke their mission critical app and you responded with, "I'm sorry, who are you?"
Yeah.
And they're a VP from like 4 organizations over. Yeah. Because your boss's boss's boss decided to give away the schema to your database, and then you changed it because you needed to add it's 100% encapsulation violation.
You said that way too shortly. My line was always, "I'm sorry, who are you? And why shouldn't I tell you to get stuffed?"
Yeah. I was more diplomatic.
That's why I don't make it in cubicles.
I'd hold off on that second part of that sentence. But
yeah,
that's just me.
Well, yeah, there are very few people in the world who are less tactful than me, Richard Campbell. And I'm not saying you're one of them.
But no, I'm often tactful, but
so what the
I
hell
also
were we
know a good line when I see one.
All right, so what the hell are we talking about with the whipped cream and the cherry you were going to put on top of that?
I was just going to say that whenever you have a relational database, your schema is what you seek to encapsulate.
Yes.
Right. That was part of the whole reason for stored procs.
Yep.
Is they act as a encapsulation layer.
Right.
And, if you don't care to encapsulate your relational database, that's fine. Just live with the consequences of VPs calling you up and, you resisting the urge to tell them to, how did Richard put it? Get stuffed. That's right.
Get stuffed.
That is the polite version for a podcast.
There you go. There you go.
There are several other versions I'm sure the listener can contemplate.
Exactly.
So what if you're new to the whole, I can't imagine you're new to it, but what if you've never used a document database before? What are the sort of the reasons that these things have become, really popular?
So part of the thing is the document model, the document data model is it frequently lines up with some of the things that we're doing. So for example, the canonical example for a document store is a blog, right? If you're maintaining a weblog. Each entry is a document in the blog. And there's a bunch of information around that particular entry. Who wrote it, when they wrote it, the tags that are for that particular entry, etc. But when I fetch the blog entry, I want everything about the blog entry. And so I can fetch that back as a singular document, right? And there are a lot of cases where when I'm looking for a thing, I'm looking for that one thing. So frequently a customer's order history, right? When I'm looking at the order history, I'm often not looking at I'm not looking across the entirety of all customers to figure out which customers have a history of ordering toilet paper. I'm looking at this particular customer's order history because I want to, look at their list of purchases because they want to dispute one or something similar. And so if sort of the natural data model that you're working with is one that has kind of a central piece to it with some ancillary data, a document data model would work. If you've ever built a star schema in a relational database, I would argue that you are actually building a document model in a relational database.
And in the end, as a developer, you get back a list of objects, which are essentially documents in and of themselves, right? I mean, it's just another way to think of it. But, we're using JSON all the time, right? To persist and serialize and deserialize. And so, actually taking something in JSON and stuffing it into a relational database actually in 2023 seems kind of strange if you think about it.
It takes time.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just the aesthetics of it. It's the fact that you have to do, like you were talking about earlier. I have to serialize it. I have to take this object model, which could be cyclical, by the way, which JSON does not deal with well any more than XML did. I have to take this object model, pound it into the document model of JSON, and then ship that. When it comes back, I have to somehow rehydrate it back to my object model. When it would, in many cases make a lot more sense to take this and store it au naturel. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why I loved object databases back when they were popular, because writing code in Java or C#, my schema is my class. We're done here.
Right.
Right. And so it saves you time and energy and effort, both at runtime as well as during development, if you can store the thing in its natural state.
So I remember talking to Oren Eni back, and Richard probably does too, about RavenDB, and all the questions that I had, like, one of the benefits of SQL Server is indexes. You can index fields that you're going to do queries on, and then they create these separate databases or separate tables called indexes so that they can be looked up quickly. And, I quickly found out how useful an index is when I did not index a date field in the old .NET Rocks, thing. And then I want to do a query, and this was like on requests. Like I had web requests in a database, right, with a date. And I wanted to do a query to see how many, hits we got how many downloads we got between this date and that date. And it was like, like sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. So I asked Oren, how does the document database deal with that? And I don't know if Couchbase and Mongo do this, but RavenDB basically looks at what you're doing and what you're querying and builds indexes on a low priority background thread in the background. Do they all do that now?
So different databases will do different things, right? And a lot of this is up to the database designer. And as a counter example, I will give you CouchDB, which again is different from Couchbase. World's worst naming decision, by the way, Couchbase.
Yeah.
Naming yourself after something else. But in CouchDB, they actually, what we would think about in terms of indexes and so forth, they call views, and they build them ahead of time. And every time you insert or remove data, they modify the view. And so they are choosing to optimize for reads as opposed to doing that lookup at later, because it takes time to do that when you write something into the database, obviously, right? So it really is one of those things that the database designers can do, based on the decisions they want to make, right? So in the case of RavenDB, if they do that indexing on a low priority thread, their assumption is that you're not going to immediately query along these indices once you've put something in.
Yeah.
Or they're willing to take the performance hit, while we're doing this. Other databases, particularly a lot of the relational databases, because they wanted to maintain those ACID level semantics, they would do that indexing during the query and not return to you until all the indexes were updated and everything was correct.
I don't like that at all.
Well, it depends on what you want, right?
It kind of defeats the purpose of having an index, right? Oh, the first time you actually query with these fields, you're going to have to wait on that. We'll be back to you in a few minutes. Thanks.
Well, and that's why the RDBMS said we'll update them all while you're putting the data in. We'll make sure that the index is always ready to go so that you come back and issue a query right after doing that insert, update, or delete. We're ready for you. We're good to go. You just paid for it, though, while you were waiting for that initial data modification to take place.
Okay.
Different databases will make different decisions. And that's, that's part of just like there's certain things that are fun from a language designer's perspective, this is part of the fun for a database designer is to say, I'm going to choose, or in some cases, I'm going to make that slider available to you, the DBA, to be able to decide where do we want to optimize.
So, obviously a lot about these different things. Is there anything in Couchbase that you wish they would have done differently or better or other?
I have become enamored of graph databases in general. I think that the graph model is one that is actually probably the hardest to replicate in other data models.
And how's that different from the document? Instead of pointing from one document to another, you duplicate it and have a tree for every record, or what?
So a graph database is something that will support cyclical references very easily. So the canonical example here is, let's assume that we want to represent the three of us and our respective spouses in a document. And so we have person, right? I'll use the XML.
Yeah.
We have an XML tag called person, first name Carl, last name Franklin. Now you're married, so we'll have a spouse field there, which has, first name, last name, spouse, which has you, first name, last name, spouse, which has her.
Oh.
And suddenly we get into this deep infinite recursion.
Yeah.
Right? So either we can't really represent persons the way we think of ourselves as I have a spouse that is a property of me, the person. Whereas in a graph database, fundamentally the data structure is nodes and arcs. So we have node, first name, Richard, last name Campbell. And then we have an arc to another node, first name Stacy, last name Holt. And that arc can have, in fact, data associated with it, such as beginning of the marriage, and if they get divorced, end of the marriage.
So right? The arc is sort of like a relationship.
Right. It's a connection. It's a connector between these two nodes. Right.
Got it.
And so if you've ever tried to model genealogy data,
right?
If you ever looked at a, genealogy database, particularly because, in some cases, not only can two people have been married and then got divorced, but they could get married again, right? And so those would just be two separate arcs, or one arc with a begin, end.
It's like going to the fridge and saying, oh, this milk is spoiled. Well, maybe tomorrow it'll be fresh.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We'll leave people's, life choices off to the side. We still need to be able to model it.
Yeah.
And so graph databases do that. They handle those cyclical relationships very, very well.
Okay.
Much better than JSON. And this is funny because JSON and XML are very similar in the sense that they are both kind of a hierarchical data model. They form a tree.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So that's the one thing is I wish Couchbase had, I wish they had a little bit better in the way of graph support, but that is one of those things that's very, very tricky to store and particularly to do so distributed. And so, there are certain points at which you say, if I want to be everything to everybody, I'm probably going to be not very good to anybody.
I'm trying to think of how I would approach that relationship thing with spouses. You would probably have like a group's table with person IDs, basically, right? So you'd have a group, and then this group name is spouse or whatever, spouses, and then you would have the people that are spouses. Because now you get into, right, what if you're polyamorous? What if you have 2 spouses, which is legal in some states?
Yeah, I guess we were talking about data. Sooner or later, the many-to-many conversation was going to come up.
Of course it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been ways to be able to model graphs in, for example, a relational database model. And Joe Selko has a book that is about as thick as your head.
And that should tell you something.
How to do it. Right, exactly.
You will be reading this for a while.
Yes, exactly.
Well, friends.
Yeah, I guess that's a
great
show.
Conversation. Yeah.
I missed you guys. We need to do this.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Missed you too, man. So, well, thanks, and come back soon.
I will be happy to come back. What's your schedule look like tomorrow?
Come on over.
Next day?
I got a barbecue going.
There you go.
All right.
There's bound to be some smoked meat around here somewhere.
Absolutely.
There you go.
And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.